So hi guys, my name is Ian Ford Terry. I'm an archaeologist and horticulturist at the Springs Preserve. I've been here for about 2 years now working on this special project here, the Nuwu Pahsats garden, also known in Southern Paiute as an English translation, the People's Garden. And I was really delighted to be invited to be part of this project. It's some work that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm really glad to be able to share it with you guys here tonight. So thank you for coming, first of all, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. So here we go. So Nuwu Pahsats, when translated from the Southern Paiute into English, means the people's garden. The word Nuwu means the people, while the word Pahsats, which contains the ubiquitous Paiute morpheme pa, or water, means something akin to an irrigated field. At over 1 acre, it's one of the largest garden spaces at the Springs Preserve and is dedicated to preserving the language and lifeways of the Southern Nevada Paiutes, particularly those of the Moapa, Las Vegas, and Pahrump Paiute tribes. The garden's special focus is on the botanical aspects of their traditional ecological knowledge, with an eye to the preservation of that knowledge and to the conservation of the plants to which that knowledge pertains. Beginning in the fall of 2023, the Springs Preserve consulted with members of these groups, collectively known as the Nuwuvi Language Group, on the interpretation for this garden, and it was from this consultation process that the name Nuwu Pahsats was born. The garden itself is a botanical microcosm of the Las Vegas Valley, containing representative plant species from the Spring Mountains to the Colorado River, with special emphases on upland, lowland, and riparian plant communities, as well as traditional cultivated garden spaces near water sources. In this way, the garden encompasses the major regions which the Nuwuvi visit through the different seasons of the year in accordance with their traditional subsistence regimes. Upland areas, traditionally visited in the summer, feature pinyon pines, oak trees, and agaves, as well as associated interpretive areas for food preparation, including roasting pits and bedrock mortars. Lowland areas include a Mojave meadow with a special focus on grain production, featuring Indian ricegrass, which we just planted a bunch of by seed, so I'm excited to see that come up in the meadow if the rabbits don't get to it, but we fenced it off. We've also got drop seed and chia, which also just started sprouting, and it's reseeded from last year, which is also incredibly exciting to just watch these plants do their own thing. We also have Joshua trees and other yuccas. In the riparian areas, willows, velvet ash, arrowweed, bulrush, and mesquites predominate, with interpretive areas highlighting the construction of traditional housing, basket making, and irrigated gardens with cultivated crops such as corn, beans, melons, amaranth, and sunflowers. And this panel here, what you see in the diagram is an actual diagram from Elizabeth Kelly's early 20th century ethnographic field notes. So this is directly lifted from other gardens within this region, directly adjacent to the Springs Preserve or within the preserve proper, that actually feature these planting diagrams or these planting regimes. So really kind of exciting. This is the one from the local spring. We've also got floodplain irrigation from the Colorado River. The present authors recommend initiating the consultation process at the very start of indigenous-focused community-based projects like this one. Because consultation did not occur at the outset of the planning and design phases, Nuwu Pahsats ran through a number of iterative conceptions, beginning first in the minds of Springs Preserve staff and Lage Design, a local landscape design company. Following the initial garden design, a construction firm installed the hardscape and infrastructure, while Springs Preserve garden staff built the garden itself. Concurrent with the garden build, the consultation process with the Nuwuvi Language Group proved to be especially important to the goals and overall interpretation of the garden. A number of new pathways toward conservation of biocultural diversity emerged as a result of this consultation process. And this is a photo of some of the members of the language group out at Warm Springs, where we met for one of our sessions. Biocultural diversity, a concept developed by linguistic anthropologist Louisa Maffei in the 1990s, recognizes the profound interdependence between biological, cultural, and linguistic diversity. Maffei observed that the regions which with rich biological diversity often overlap with areas of high cultural and linguistic diversity, suggesting that ecological health and human cultural expression are deeply interconnected. This concept posits that traditional knowledge, languages, and customs contribute directly to sustaining biodiversity, and as local and indigenous communities tend to foster ecological stewardship through their practices and beliefs. The notion of biocultural diversity has influenced fields such as conservation biology, anthropology, and sustainable development, encouraging integrated approaches that respect and preserve both cultural and ecological systems, and it aligns closely with the Springs Preserve's mission. The traditional territories of the Nuwuvi range through 4 states, encompassing most of northern Arizona and southern Utah, southern Nevada, and southern California. 3 of these states rank among the top 10 in the United States for biodiversity, with Nevada ranking 11th. All 4 states, moreover, rank in the top 5 for plant species at risk of extinction. Nuwuvi territories span a vast swath of the canyonlands of northwestern Colorado Plateau, from Glen Canyon National Monument across the north rim of the Grand Canyon and up into the Grand Staircase, and then following the Virgin River out of Zion National Park and into Lake Mead, and continuing along the western side of the Colorado Corridor to Lake Havasu. This topographical variation creates a rich array of biological diversity as species group together into different life zones and plant communities along elevation gradients. This topography also creates sky islands like Mount Charleston, resulting in a number of endemic species. The traditional range of the Nuwuvi is described by a series of 140 songs, which comprise the Salt Song Trail, a sacred song cycle of the Nuwuvi that demarcates a pathway circumscribing these incredibly diverse landscapes. The Nuwuvi are furthermore subdivided into several distinct bands or tribes, each bounded by alternating sequences of high mountains and deep canyons, giving rise to a number of dialectical variations of the Southern Paiute language. This fueled linguistic anthropologist Edward Sapir's fascination with the Southern Paiute language in the early 20th century and led to early efforts at language preservation, but it also renders contemporary preservation efforts more difficult, as the dialectical variation can differ significantly from one side of the Nuwuvi territory to the other. Tribes and bands with different dialects are concerned about preserving their unique linguistic variations, which encompass a traditional ecological knowledge unique to that region. While not operating under Maffei's theoretical foundations at the outset, it became clear from the very first meetings with the Nuwuvi Language Group that the consultation process represented an opportunity to help preserve and revitalize the local dialect of the Southern Paiute language, and, by extension, the traditional ecological knowledge unique to Southern Nevada. The group had initially expressed serious concerns that working with members of Nuwuvi tribes or bands from outside of the Las Vegas region would dilute efforts towards local language preservation, and consequently, the preservation of local cultural knowledge. Working closely with the group to elicit their place-based stories and traditions, the interpretation of the garden focused on everyday words and terms that visitors to the Springs Preserve could relate to, so as to make an accessible pathway toward appreciating and internalizing the local Paiute dialect and its accompanying worldview. Therefore, the interpretation emphasizes the names of plants, words describing the preparation and storage of foods, and words and phrases related to the production of housing, baskets, and other material goods. This focus on language as the basic building blocks of everyday life, culture, and traditional ecological knowledge permits an accessible entry into the worldview of the Southern Paiute, a basic comprehension of which is one of the essential takeaways for Springs Preserve visitors who, it is hoped, will be inspired by Nuwu relationships with nature toward a more sustainable relationship of their own with the living landscape of Southern Nevada. These changes in worldview and attendant changes in attitudes towards indigenous peoples and their natural world in turn affect behavior changes which can range anywhere from a more conscientious engagement with the natural world to active participation in the conservation and restoration of local lands. The focus on language as the basic building blocks of culture also allows the Springs Preserve to focus on conserving the native plants that make up the basic physical materials of Nuwu culture. Nuwu Pahsats has therefore endeavored to preserve over 70 words and local Nuwu phrases by representing them phonetically within the interpretive panels and by embedding QR codes linking to professional audio recordings of these words as vocalized by the most fluent speaker of the local dialect in the region, Leroy Howell, pictured here with the shovel planting a pinyon pine. Howell enjoys a special connection to the Springs Preserve as his great-great-grandfather, John Howell, was one of the earliest residents of the Springs area on record, working the Spring Rancho in the 1870s and later settling north of Beatty and intermarrying with the Nuwuvi. The terms and phrases enunciated by Howell are used throughout the interpretation as a holistic means of guiding visitors towards a sense of experience of the natural environment as mediated through the language and worldviews of its original inhabitants. As suggested by Nathan Harper's paper, which was presented with the paper that this was presented at the Three Corners Conference earlier last year I believe in November. It's been a long time, feels like, since then. But the Springs Preserve is currently experimenting with even more immediate means of conveying semiotic superstructures through the implementation of rock art panels as wayfinding mechanisms throughout the garden. The garden is also home to numerous species of culturally significant native plants and cultivars of Southwestern heirloom crops, with an eye toward building seed banks and eventually nursery stock of these plants to be made available first to our local indigenous communities and partners, and then to the general public. Our approach to determining which native plants to include as culturally significant was based on primarily on Stoffel's work from 1999 concerning the creation of an index of cultural significance for plant species mentioned throughout the ethnographic literature. Many of the highest ranking species or genera in the Stoffel study were corroborated by archaeobotanical data, particularly pollen analyses from the scorpion knoll and larder sites, all of which seem to prioritize pinyon pine, oak, mesquite, as cultural keystone species for their respective plant communities over the long term. The consistency and continuity provided by these and other ongoing efforts to correlate and corroborate these data help to guide the decisions regarding the curation of the plant communities represented at Nuwu Pahsats, described previously, and have made enormous contributions to our ongoing appreciation and understanding of the species and the heirloom cultivars we are currently conserving here. To this effect, the Springs Preserve has mobilized numerous partnerships around Nuwu Pahsats to facilitate not only in situ conservation of these culturally significant species here at the preserve. It's kind of their natural landscape, but there it is kind of ex situ cultivation, conservation technically, but also the agricultural capacity to collect seeds and to propagate plant materials necessary to meet the increasing demands of water-wise urban landscapes, in addition to the massive need for traditional restoration purposes. At present, there is concerningly little native plant material available, even for restoration, and as a result, the BLM is currently working with local partners, including SNWA and the Springs Preserve, to build agricultural-scale plant production of native plants for seed collection. One of the most significant benefits of conserving culturally significant species and cultivars is the fact that most of these species are edible, and thus represent an effort to bolster the production of local, culturally appropriate foods, building capacity for food sovereignty within local tribal and urban indigenous communities. Through institutional partnerships like those we are fostering with the UNR Extension Master Gardeners, the BLM, and Nevada State University, we continue to invite local expertise regarding these plants to leverage community education regarding the appropriate propagation protocols and horticultural implementations in the urban landscapes of Las Vegas. Since September of 2023, we have collected, cleaned, and cataloged over 15 pounds of native seeds with the help of Master Gardeners and Springs Preserve volunteers. Actually, there were really only 2 of them involved in this process, and between the 2 of them and myself, we have managed to conserve a number of native seeds, and we're pretty excited about that. These seeds are stored in a laboratory-grade refrigerator and are intended to be used to augment the BLM's efforts, as well as for germination and propagation experiments and workshops with community members, master gardeners, and guests of the Springs Preserve. Ongoing discussions with Jennifer Edmonds of Nevada State University aim eventually to build native plant and heirloom cultivar production in a greenhouse propagation facility adjacent to Nuwu Pahsats. Right now I'm writing a grant for the San Manuel Board of Gaming and Hospitality Authority, and we are hoping to receive a $50,000 grant to create this greenhouse plan and to institute a number of different workshops aimed at propagation. So look forward to that here in the coming year in 2025 and 2026. At the same time, we continue to seek input from our local indigenous communities to help guide this native plant renaissance in Southern Nevada. In addition to ongoing discussions and activities within with the Nuwuvi Language Group, tribal groups working to build native plant capacity and conserve traditional Southwestern heirloom cultivars, such as the farm on the Chemehuevi Reservation in California, are valued collaborators working towards shared goals. Because we are uniting several different communities around Nuwu Pahsats, it is essential to create an appropriate environment of mutual understanding, respect, and appreciation wherein these communities can come together. Internal education efforts are already underway within the Vegas Valley Water District and the Springs Preserve to assure cultural literacy and appropriate understanding of the principles of allyship to our local indigenous communities among our staff and volunteers. These efforts are still in their nascent stages at the Springs Preserve, but ought to contribute to lasting partnerships and allegiances with assurances of our mutual goals of biocultural diversity conservation as a primary focus. Active programming in tandem with Nuwu Pahsats began in February of 2024 with the Nuwu Pahsats Speaker Series funded by a $25,000 grant from the San Manuel Gaming and Hospitality Authority. The series featured 6 monthly presentations from indigenous knowledge keepers from throughout the Southwestern region, presenting diverse voices on indigenous relationships with nature, food sovereignty, and cultural resilience, spiraling around the region and centering on a culminating panel discussion featuring members of the Nuwuvi Language Group. Melanie Smokey, Western Shoshone, opened the series in February, focusing on the significance of water in the desert life and traditional plant relationships. Dr. Michael Kututwit Johnson, Hopi, spoke in April, emphasizing protections for heirloom seeds as indigenous intellectual property and donated Hopi blue corn seeds for community planting. Reagan Witzelusi, who's Dene, shared her work on restoring Navajo peach trees and traditional farming practices in May, inspiring local Dene members of our community to collaborate on watershed restoration projects in Navajo Nation. Chef Crystal Wapepa, Kickapoo, explored indigenous foodways in June, sparking interest in culturally appropriate, resilient food systems. Carrie Cannon, Kiowa, an ethnobotanist for the Hualapai tribe, spoke in July on Mojave Desert plants and indigenous uses, addressing community needs for native plant seeds. The series concluded in August with the Southern Paiute Language Group, which shared their enduring relationship with the land and traditional foods, encouraging awareness of the Southern Nevada Paiutes' ongoing presence in Southern Nevada. Nuwu Pahsats' annual programming at the Springs Preserve, still in development, guides visitors through Southern Paiute seasonal subsistence rounds, tracing traditional planting and foraging practices from the Spring Mountains to the Las Vegas Valley. The Spring Gardening Series begins with planting culturally significant crops like sunflowers, corn, and ancient desert melons in the spring and river gardens. The Foraging Series follows, introducing participants to essential Paiute foods like Paiute spinach in March, wolfberries in April, and agave in May, culminating with mesquite and prickly pear harvesting in the summer. Supporting this programming, a 15-page report by Carrie Cannon, July's Nuwu Pahsats Speaker Series guest, provides a framework for self-guided tours highlighting Southern Paiute fiber plants and foodways. The preserve is also collaborating with Richie Savage from the Clark County School District's Department of Indian Education to bring urban indigenous students on field trips, deepening their engagement with these cultural practices. Through these immersive sessions, Nuwu Pahsats fosters community connection to the ancient desert subsistence cycles that have long sustained the Paiute people. In summary, Nuwu Pahsats represents a vital nexus for the preservation of indigenous language, traditional ecological knowledge, and biodiversity in Southern Nevada. Through close collaboration with the Nuwuvi Language Group, the Springs Preserve has created a dynamic educational space where visitors can engage with the rich cultural and botanical heritage of the Southern Paiutes. By embedding linguistic elements into interpretive materials and prioritizing the conservation of culturally significant plants, Nuwu Pahsats serves as both a sanctuary for biocultural diversity and as a model for collaborative conservation initiatives. This project underscores the importance of involving Indigenous voices from the outset to ensure authenticity and respect in cultural preservation efforts, ultimately fostering a deeper public understanding and appreciation for the interdependence of culture, language, and the environment. And that is it for me. These are some of the works that we referred to within the paper. And I will open this up to questions because I'm really excited to get to those. It's like somebody's typing. My favorite Nuwu word. Wow. I mean, pa is just so fundamental to everything here in the desert. So pa is found as a morpheme, as a word that is kind of bound up with a lot of different words that we see here, like throughout the valley, like Pahrump. A lot of place names contain the word pa. Um, Paranagat, and Moapa, which means water from the river. So there are a lot of ways that water integrates with the language. And so I think just conceptually, pa is probably my favorite word, but there are so many great words that, Southern Paiute language has this really unique uh, uh, pronunciation that is not initially apparent when you're reading these names in documents and some of the literature. You don't get at all a sense of the flavor of these words. There are a lot of like long, pronounced, drawn out, kind of guttural pronunciation. So like the word for the language, the native language itself, which is translated to Indian people talking, is Nuwu and it's actually the guttural is drawn out. And in our interpretation panels in our early discussions, we had actually kind of heard that as a separate syllable, but it's actually umbaga. And it sounds almost like there's umbaga, but it's actually baga. So that's one instance. And then another one is tumur. And that's the word for Paiute spinach, or also known as Prince's Plume, which is actually a member of the Brassica family. And when it starts to flower, the florets from the tumur actually resemble broccoli florets. And the taste, I don't know if Rayette's here, but she can verify that the taste is a very close approximation to broccoli, and it's actually cooked or soaked in water to kind of draw out some. It tends to be a selenium concentrator or accumulator. It grows in selenium-rich soils, but if you can grow it in a sterile, or not a sterile, but an appropriate toxin-free garden soil, it actually becomes something you can harvest and probably eat raw in some circumstances. And I do allow some of our guests to nibble on it from time to time when it's in its early vegetation season, which is right now. And actually, we've got quite a few of these plants kind of spreading throughout the garden, and they're just gorgeous with these beautiful they're starting to flower, and so they're putting out these beautiful yellow blooms. All right, okay, so I could go on and on about the Nuwu language. So we Noah and Sydney. I'm wondering if this is the same Noah from the Springs Preserve. I don't know if I can get an answer to that, but Noah asks if I mentioned Joshua tree, will there be any Mojave or narrow leaf yuccas? So Mojave yuccas, absolutely. Yucca shedidra is absolutely represented in the garden. That's a great one. Oh, it is you, Noah. Hi. So this is great. This is like all my friends are here. So uh, so Mojave yucca, yes, absolutely. Narrow leaf yucca tends to be found in there's only one region I've seen it so far, and that's out in Valley of Fire. Although the narrow leaf yucca tends to be very, very common throughout Arizona and the Four Corners area. So that one is probably the preferred leaf material for making your basic sandals because of the long, narrow leaves are easy to weave. But we don't have so many of them here in Southern Nevada. They're mostly found in like sandy benches out right along the roadway in Valley of Fire as you go off past the Petroglyph Canyon trail. It's just off to the left side as you're going out towards the trails out there. So that's the one place I've spotted narrowleaf yucca, but I do think it deserves a representation in the garden. And as this garden is a living exhibit, we have the opportunity to be able to add biodiversity as it comes to into our awareness and onto our radar, and most importantly, as we have access to the plant material. I think that's really kind of the bottleneck that we have mostly is the availability of a lot of this plant material, which is why we are working towards starting this Nuwu Pahsats native plant propagation project, because we recognize that there just really isn't a lot of some of these plants available. For instance, probably the most notable is juniper. I have not seen Utah juniper in any nursery anywhere ever, and I believe that the reason for that is because the seeds are difficult to propagate. They do, I believe, require cold stratification, and the propagation protocols are not widely available. So one of the things we're looking to do with the Nuwu Pahsats native plant propagation project is to experiment, first of all, with germination of these, so pooling all of the resources of the master gardeners and the UNR extension horticulture departments, the nurseries at NPS like Songdog, the Nevada Division of Forestry Nursery, and our tribal partners, to kind of compare notes and to share our understandings of how these plants grow and develop. And so through that, I think we can really kind of arrive at some best practices for the propagation of some of these plants, which will mean that some of these plants will finally have more availability to the general public and for restoration purposes. So, are we running short on time? I saw a 5-minute warning, and I don't know if we are limited at all. Okay, I will keep going then.
It started calculating the hour like 20 minutes before we logged on. I don't understand that, so we're good.
All right, no worries. All right. So the Sky McLean asks, as you write the text for your panels and incorporate the new words, do you just use the term pa once to identify water and then use water the rest of the panel? Typically, no. Wherever possible, we use the Nuwu terms and tend to repeat them. So they will be apparent within the panels. There are times when it wasn't necessarily helpful or appropriate to use that word repeatedly. So there may be instances of actually the English word water sprinkled throughout some of these panels, but for the most part, we do try to emphasize these in bold text on the panels, and so you will find them everywhere. Okay, so Rachel asks, is Nuwu Pahsats mostly focused on foraging and gardening related to food consumption? Short answer, yes, but additionally, there's more than that. A lot of these plants, like for instance, well, let me read the rest of your question first. Can you speak more to any plants at the preserve that can be utilized as natural dyes, pigments, etc.? Yes. So pigment-wise, we do have some amaranth that ended up in our collection, and it was kind of scattered throughout the teaching garden. I don't know if you guys are familiar with our garden space, but we also have a teaching garden that's oriented towards helping people understand better how to garden in the desert. And we do have some Hopi red dye amaranth, and that plant can be used for pigmentation. A lot of plants have unique pigmentation properties, and so wherever there is a really distinct color, there is a very good chance that there was some usage for pigmentation. But Hopi red dye amaranth is the one example I have specifically related to dyes and pigmentations in our garden collection right now, but we are looking, as I said, this is a living exhibit, so we are looking to add more plants as they become available and are pop up on our radar with our ongoing conversations with our consultation partners. So the other things that I might point out is utility plants. So like arrowweed is a very straight, long stalk that its given name suggests what it might have been used for, but it was used for a lot of things like building kane, which are traditional housing structures. And so those would be constructed using willow poles. So like the Salix exigua, the coyote willow, and they grow up and they're tied together at the top or arched over, and then the arrowweed is kind of woven into the framework that the willow provides. And in some cases, the willows are themselves grown out and tied together in a living structure. These are summer homes, and they create a natural kind of cooling effect given the evapotranspiration of the living plant. So it's kind of a really neat usage of these plants, and it really speaks to the indigenous innovation and ingenuity of a lot of these uses of plants. Other examples of that would be we have an entire section of the garden dedicated to basket making plants. So a lot of those are riparian in nature. They tend to grow kind of straight, and so they're very useful for that. And they can also be coppice, so you can cut them back and they grow even if the branches aren't straight right away. When you cut them back down to the soil level, they will sprout up again with new shoots from the base, and those shoots will be straight. So for instance, oak leaf sumac, roost tree lobata is another example of that, where it's a very common and popular basket making plant, and it is widely coppiced to produce these tall, straight shoots. There are a number of other ones that I could probably talk about, but we'll I'll invite you out to the preserve and we can talk more about them. So the other question coming from Doyle is my program branching out into other Native American tribes? He says he's currently working with the Timbisha Shoshone in Death Valley and would hope to eventually work with our group on native plant interests. You're always welcome. Hello?
You missed one.
I did.
Yeah, but you could answer.
Where am I? Here we are.
Rachel.
I think we got that one. That was the pigmentation and utility plant question. So yes, there is a lot of emphasis on food based plants, mostly because during COVID, we really got a sense of what food insecurity could be like, and there was a real spike in home gardens, kind of in the spirit of victory gardens. And I do see a lot more of that, especially with this new administration. A lot of people are starting to grow their own gardens, and good on them. That's a really good way to establish mutual aid and food security. We are partners with the Solidarity Fridge out in eastern Las Vegas. That's Victoria Flores, and they're doing really great work out there, oriented toward food sovereignty and providing food for her neighborhood out in East Las Vegas, out by the Sunrise Library. So that's kind of one of my passions, is food security and food production. But utility plants are really, really important and really interesting to learn about. Especially the arrowweed also has a neat kind of property where the roots have a very aromatic scent to them, and the nature of a vetiver almost. And so I don't know that it's been used to distill into an essential oil, but it has a very vetiver-like property, as well as being a really unique utility plant. It's been said that when Indigenous people look out on the landscape, they see not only a grocery store and a pharmacy, but also a hardware store and a temple. So all of those are part of the natural environs, and it kind of intimates the nature of the sacred relationships between humans and the land, and the reciprocity of the bounty of nature that's shared with us, but also our role, the human role that is in augmenting and managing the landscape. And so when John Muir, this is one of my favorite stories, when John Muir first walked from San Francisco to Yosemite, he had this idea of this untouched wilderness. And so that became kind of embedded in a lot of our mindsets for land management and it really missed the close relationships that indigenous people have with the landscape. These are all what are called anthropogenic landscapes. There is really almost no part of the earth that is untouched by human hands and not participated in this living relationship between people and plants in the landscape. And that has archaeological evidence supporting it, based on soil profiles and palynological studies. So we are finding these mosaic of diversity based on cultural burnings and land management practices that give rise to the production of, in some cases, more grain plants. These kind of early succession pioneer plants that grow like grasses and then eventually mature into shrubs. And this is common all over the world. So, sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent here, Doyle. So are we branching out into, wow, there's more questions. Are we branching out into other tribes? So one of the things that came onto our radar as we were doing the Nuwu Pahsats speaker series was the vested interests of the Chemehuevi tribe in our region. This was not known to us through our work with the Southern Paiute Language Group, but it became apparent as they voiced their connections to the Springs Preserve in the Southern Nevada and especially the Las Vegas Valley. So as a result, I was able to meet with Daniel Levas from the Chemehuevi farm, and so we are going to be working. He's been invited to the panel discussion for the Nuwu Pahsats native plant propagation project, and we hope to be sharing some of our plant material. Exchanging plant materials. The Timbisha Shoshone, they are kind of peripheral to this area, although they do have some history of presence here, but it is predominantly, to my understanding, this area was mostly occupied by Southern Paiute communities from, I think out towards Pahrump, you're going to get a little bit more of a Shoshone presence, but here in Las Vegas and up towards Moapa, it's very much predominantly Southern Paiute. But yes, Doyle, you are totally welcome to come join us here at the Springs Preserve for a tour and help us with some of this work in the garden. Really, it takes all of us. We really need each other to promote the well-being of this this land, and we really need to lean on and support and uplift our tribal partners because they are the original inhabitants of this land, and so we really need their perspective and their understanding of appropriate relationships with the land in order to do this work effectively. So I have a response from Rachel, and she says that she's wondering about the potential for gardening these kinds of resources for traditional potters, ceramicists, and artisans. So I'm trying to think. I am not a ceramicist. So this is a little bit out of my area of expertise, but the potential for gardening these plants is very high. There are opportunities. I'm hoping maybe you could clarify what you mean in terms of resources for specifically aimed at potters and ceramicists. But in terms of growing these out at home, we encourage it. That is part of the kind of the purpose of the garden is to inspire visitors to utilize these plants in their landscape. Right now we have the turf replacement program, and kind of typically some of the default replacements for the turf is gravel and cactus and astroturf, and that is just going to elevate the heat island effect. So if you weren't hot last summer, wait till this one, because if we keep planting gravel instead of plants and grasses, which have, there's so many very different native plants. Like they can really create texture and variety in your landscape, and they are appropriate to this climate. Some of them need, more of a specific microclimate. For instance, many plants tend to prefer riparian areas, but if you can provide the shade with mesquites and other native trees, you can actually create some of these microclimates. And you may have to open your flow valves a little bit more for some of your emitters for some of the riparian plants. But for the most part, there is a wide diversity of different kinds of plants with all kinds of different forms that you can use creatively in Nevada landscapes. And in fact, we do have at least, I know that I furnished a plant list, a culturally significant plant list to at least one HOA in out towards Boulder City at the edge of Henderson, out where Nevada State University is, and I have another HOA that is interested in learning more about integrating native plants into their landscape. So we're making slow progress. HOAs are kind of the gatekeepers of landscape management, and really are kind of the ultimate arbiters of how much water we use or don't in some of our landscape areas. So a lot of times they're plant lists that are kind of come from the East Coast or other parts of the country, and they are not necessarily appropriate to our region. And so to have to be making some headway with some of these homeowner associations is really kind of I view it as kind of a personal triumph for our garden, because that means that we're cracking open that market. And so hopefully there will be more people integrating these into their landscape, and that will inspire others. But we do need to produce these plants first before we can even plant them. So the efforts to produce the seed, which is the basis of most of the plant propagation, some of these plants can be grown from cuttings. For instance, the willows and the cottonwoods can easily be cut from the shoots that they pop off the base, and then planted kind of directly in as pole plantings, kind of like you would with your fig shoots, for instance, or and you can just kind of put them into a pot and they'll start growing a new tree. But for the most part, seeds are a big part of our strategy right now. We're learning how to germinate and propagate some of these plants. And as we expand that knowledge, we will expand the ability of our community, Southern Nevada wide, to produce more of this plant material for use both in landscapes and in restoration. I hope that answered your questions. I kind of waxed tangential there, but I haven't gotten clarification on resources for traditional potters or ceramicists, but I will, if Rachel, if you email me, I will look into that and see if there are others who might have another insight into that, and to kind of help you work out this question.
Ian, do you want to put your email in the chat so that way?
I sure would. Yes. My email is ian.fordterry, all one word, at springspreserve.org. So feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to chat with you, and even happier to have you out for a visit. We'll be opening the garden to private tours, kind of as a soft opening this spring. I believe probably starting somewhere around Earth Day. And then we will be having, we're planning a ceremonial opening event for the fall. So we still have some construction underway in the garden. We're putting pavers in along the pathway to make it more accessible. And we're adding a perimeter gate to keep the coyotes out. They have been notoriously ravaging our netafim and our drip irrigation, probably because it's using, we have an inline fertigation system where we apply humic acid and mycorrhizal mixtures to the soil to condition the soil, but we've also got what's called a critter max pest repellent, which apparently does nothing to repel the pests, but seems to draw the coyotes because it smells like the back alley of an Italian restaurant where they dump all the garbage. Very strong garlic and rosemary smell. Rabbits don't seem to care. The coyotes, I think it just draws them over to it. So as we put out this fence, it was actually suggested to me by the Tipo of Moapa, Darren DeBoda, to actually plant cat claw acacia along the perimeter as a barrier for critters. He says it's very effective for rabbits and coyotes. So looking forward to kind of applying some of that traditional knowledge out at the perimeter to keep the pests out, because right now they are a nuisance. I like to say my biggest pest next to my HOA is rabbits and now coyotes, my biggest garden pests. But in any case, that's where we're at in terms of finishing off the garden and its construction. But you are all invited out. If you send me an email, I'd be happy to give you a private tour. I'm really excited to kind of show this garden off in the spring, as we've got some of the planting programming underway with the master gardeners. Like I said, we've just planted a whole field full of rice grass, so I'm anxious to see how that sprouts. I'm really looking forward to having a lush meadow of rice grass where we can go out with a winnowing tray and collect seeds in abundance. So I think with that, like I said, I could go on and on. I won't. We are 50 minutes into the hour. I just want to thank you all for coming out. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you tonight. As I said, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm more than happy to share it with you all. So thank you, Samantha, for inviting me out. And I don't see Rayette here, but thank you to her as well for editing. That's not always fun to spend time doing video editing. And I look forward to seeing you all at the Springs Preserve.
Thanks, Ian. And I will probably be emailing you as well about some of this stuff. So but thank you so much.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful night.
You too.